What happens when a CEO goes undercover and sees a manager ban a tired worker from taking water breaks? It was just past 6 in the morning when Jeremiah Porter adjusted the worn strap on his steel toe boots and stepped into the back lot of Warehouse 14, the biggest and busiest of the 16 distribution centers he owned. Jeremiah had built the company up after buying it 8 years ago from a retired couple who ran it like a mom and pop shop. Since then, he'd grown it into a chain with hundreds of employees. But lately, customer complaints were piling up and delivery times were slipping. The numbers didn't lie. Operations at the warehouse level were falling apart. He tried getting clear answers from his district managers, but all he got were polished reports and vague promises. He needed to see the truth for himself. So he shaved off his beard, dyed his hair a dull brown, and wore thick-rimmed glasses. Nobody here had ever met him. Warehouse 14 was in a different state from the corporate office, and most of his visits had been virtual since the expansion. To them, he was Jim, the newest trainee helping out during a hiring freeze. "Hey, you the new guy?" a short, wiry man asked as Jeremiah stepped inside. "Name's Craig, I run this place." Craig didn't shake hands, he just jerked his thumb toward a rack of high-visibility vests. "Grab one." "You're on unload duty. Stick with Tyrese, he'll tell you what to do." Jeremiah nodded and slipped on a vest. The warehouse was loud, hot, and filled with the smell of cardboard and diesel. Workers moved fast, dragging pallets, loading trucks, scanning inventory. No music, no chatter. Just the constant beeping of forklifts and the occasional barked order from Craig. Tyrese was in his early 20s, tall and clearly exhausted. Sweat soaked through his shirt and his eyes were red. "You good?" Jeremiah asked, falling in step next to him. Tyrese gave a tired smile. "Yeah. Just been going since 4. They got us short today. 2 guys called out, so it's just me and Lenny on unloads." "Does that happen a lot?" Tyrese shrugged. "Lately, people quit, can't really blame him." They unloaded crates for the next hour. Tyrese never stopped moving. But when he finally leaned against a wall and pulled out a water bottle, Craig stormed over. "What are you doing?" Craig snapped. Tyrese froze. "Just drinking some water, man. I've been going since. I don't care if you've been going since midnight." "You don't stop on my floor unless it's break time. You want to sit, go home." Jeremiah stood still, watching it unfold. "I'm not sitting," Tyrese said quietly. "Just water." Craig stepped closer. "I said no breaks. That includes water. You don't like it, quit." Jeremiah's jaw clenched. He looked around. No one said anything. No one looked up. They all just kept working. Tyrese didn't argue. He put the bottle away and got back to lifting crates. Later, as they wheeled a pallet toward a loading dock, Jeremiah leaned closer to him. "That happened a lot." Tyrese didn't look up. "Every day. You ever tell anyone?" He shook his head. "Who? District guy comes once a month. Craig makes it look all smooth when he's here." Jeremiah nodded, keeping his face blank, but his gut turned. In the break room, he met Lenny, a middle-aged man with a limp who moved slower than the others. He was quiet, respectful, and methodical in how he worked. "Craig give you trouble too?" Jeremiah asked during their lunch break. Lenny gave a tired chuckle. "Not as much now, I just keep my head down." "But Tyrese, kid works like 2 people and Craig still rides him." When they got back to the floor, Jeremiah watched Craig berate a woman named Denise for mislabeling a box. She hadn't. Jeremiah had seen the label himself. Still, Craig kept pushing, loud enough for everyone to hear. Denise held back tears and went back to work. Jeremiah's stomach twisted. He'd heard of tough management, but this was something else. This wasn't about productivity, it was about control. That night, he sat in his motel room and stared at the ceiling. He trusted his managers. Trusted that the chain he'd built was still living by the values he believed in. But here in this warehouse, fear ran the floor. He didn't sleep much. The next morning, he showed up early again. Tyrese was already there, unloading crates by himself. No water, no breaks, just sweat and silence. Jeremiah stayed quiet, playing the part. He didn't want to blow his cover yet, but he'd seen enough to know this wasn't just a bad day, this was normal here, and he wasn't going to let it stay that way. Jeremiah arrived before sunrise on his third day, standing just outside the warehouse's side entrance, watching the fog swirl around the distant floodlights. He'd barely slept. What he'd seen wasn't some isolated moment of bad judgment, it was a culture. One that had taken root while he'd been too focused on scaling the business. He stepped inside and was greeted not by a hello, but by the sound of a plastic crate slamming into the concrete floor. Craig was already yelling, "Pick it up." "That's inventory, not garbage." The target this time was a young woman in a faded navy hoodie struggling to stack boxes onto a conveyor. She bent down slowly, her face blank. Jeremiah stepped into the shadow of a tall shelf and watched. Craig didn't help her. Just stood with a coffee mug in hand, watching like a hawk. When she walked past him to grab another load, he muttered under his breath, "Maybe if you spent less time with that damn attitude." The woman didn't respond, she just kept moving. Jeremiah walked over to the opposite line and began organizing a stack of small parcels. Tyrese arrived a few minutes later, limping slightly. "You all right?" Jeremiah asked, keeping his voice low. "Tweaked my ankle yesterday lifting that busted pallet," Tyrese replied, brushing it off. "Didn't sleep much, came in early to get ahead." "You tell anyone?" Tyrese gave him a side glance. "What do you think?" Jeremiah didn't push. He already knew the answer. By mid-morning, Jeremiah had rotated through 3 stations. None of the equipment had been maintained properly. The rollers on the conveyor line were sticking. A pallet jack had a broken wheel. One of the scanners glitched every few scans, forcing workers to re-enter codes manually. No one reported it. They just worked around it. "Hey, Jim," Denise called from the far end of the dock. "Can you give me a hand with this manifest?" Jeremiah jogged over. She handed him a clipboard and pointed to a stack of boxes. "These were supposed to be outbound yesterday, but Craig didn't clear them, said we were over capacity." "Are we?" She shook her head. "Not even close." "I think he just didn't want to deal with it at the end of his shift." Jeremiah flipped through the paperwork. The delivery window had expired. The client would be filing a delay claim. That meant penalties. "Do you deal with that often?" he asked. "Pretty much weekly." "Stuff gets buried, Craig blames the floor, and we eat the cost." Jeremiah nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. Another worker walked by, an older man with a gray beard and a slight hunch. Jeremiah hadn't seen him before. "New guy?" he asked Denise. "Nope, that's Leo, been here longer than anyone. Craig makes him do truck inspections even though he can barely climb the rig stairs." When Jeremiah looked surprised, she added, "He's not supposed to be on those anymore. Doctor's note and everything." "But Craig says it's light duty." Jeremiah watched as Leo carefully lifted himself onto the back step of a trailer, wincing with each motion. Light duty it wasn't. Back in the main aisle, Jeremiah caught sight of Craig standing with 2 other supervisors, both holding coffees, none of them working. Lenny walked past them, carrying a box meant for 2 people. Craig didn't offer help, just laughed at something one of the others said. Jeremiah joined Lenny, grabbing the other end of the box. "You seen anyone from corporate lately?" he asked. Lenny didn't look up. "Last time was February. Some guy with a blazer and clipboard. Craig had us clean everything top to bottom the night before. Whole place looked like a showroom for 2 hours. They set the box down. You ever think of reporting what's going on?" "No use," Lenny said. "HR's in a different state." They forward complaints right back to Craig. That afternoon, a delivery truck from a third-party logistics partner pulled into the dock. The driver, a woman in her 40s with a sleeve tattoo and a neon vest, stepped out and greeted Craig. "Got your inbound from Fresno," she said. "Late," Craig snapped. "Should have been here this morning." "No one told me that," she replied, unfazed. Craig stepped closer. "Maybe listen better next time or someone else gets the route." The driver squinted at him. "You threatening my job?" "No. Just pointing out your alternatives." The driver looked him up and down. "I'll be filing a report with dispatch," Craig scoffed. "Do what you want." Jeremiah locked eyes with the driver as she walked past. She gave him a small nod, then unloaded her truck in silence. By evening, Craig had disappeared into the office upstairs while the floor team scrambled to make up for a jammed conveyor line. Denise was on the verge of tears as she tried to sort mislabeled boxes. Tyrese was hobbling. Leo was sitting on a crate, rubbing his knees. No one had taken their scheduled break. No one had dared. Jeremiah walked past the office door. Through the glass panel, he saw Craig laughing at something on his phone, feet up on the desk. He turned and walked back down to the floor. "Hey," he said to Denise. "How much longer you got?" "Another hour, if Craig doesn't make us stay late again." "What happens if you say no?" "Docked hours. Sometimes he cuts your next shift." Jeremiah looked around the warehouse. There were no cameras on the floor, just one over the front door, no time clocks either. Craig kept everything analog, which meant no automatic logs. No proof of anything. When Tyrese slipped while lifting a box and dropped to one knee, Jeremiah rushed over. "You're done," he said quietly. "Go sit, now." Tyrese looked up, panicked. "I can't. If Craig sees, I'll cover for you." Jeremiah stood between him and the rest of the floor until he moved. Tyrese limped toward the wall and sat down slowly, wincing. Jeremiah turned to find Craig coming down the stairs. "What the hell is this?" Craig called out. Jeremiah walked toward him. "He's hurt," he said calmly. Craig narrowed his eyes. "He's always got some excuse. If he can walk, he can work. His ankle's swollen. He needs rest. You a doctor now?" "No, but I've got eyes, and I've got questions about how you're running this place." Craig's face shifted. "Excuse me?" Jeremiah stepped forward, lowering his voice. "You've got broken equipment, falsified manifests, and people working through injuries. You think that's acceptable?" Craig crossed his arms. "You're a temp. You don't get to ask questions." Jeremiah stared at him for a long moment. Then he reached into his vest pocket and pulled out his ID corporate issue, with his full name and title printed clearly. "Jeremiah Porter, CEO. Actually," he said, "I do." Craig's face went pale. Behind them, the floor had gone silent. Everyone had stopped working. Even the conveyor had halted. Jeremiah turned around to face the crew. "My name's Jeremiah Porter. I own this company, and I've been watching what goes on in this warehouse for the past 3 days. No one spoke. I've seen enough to know this isn't a staffing issue. It's a leadership issue. And it ends right now." He turned back to Craig. "You're done here. Clean out your office. You'll be escorted out within the hour." Craig opened his mouth, but no words came out. "You've created a toxic, abusive environment that violates both labor standards and human decency. You're lucky I don't press charges." Craig took a step back, his hands trembling. Jeremiah turned to one of the supervisors still standing near the break room. What's your name?" "Jordan," the man said cautiously. "You were standing around all day while your team struggled." "You're finished too." Jordan didn't argue. Jeremiah looked at the remaining supervisor, a woman in a cargo vest who hadn't said a word during Craig's rampage. "You got anything to say?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "You've got one shot. Prove you can lead with respect." "I'll be watching." She nodded once, eyes wide. Jeremiah turned back to the crew. "Everyone take 15. Real break. Go hydrate, sit down, breathe. After that, we'll have a meeting right here. No offices, no closed doors." He waited as people slowly began to move. Tyrese looked stunned. Denise stared at him like she couldn't quite believe it was real. Leo stood up and leaned on a crate. "You really the owner?" he asked. Jeremiah nodded. Leo gave him the smallest of nods in return. Then he sat back down and finally relaxed. The break ended quietly. No one rushed back to their stations, but no one lingered either. Jeremiah stood near the center of the warehouse as people returned to their posts, watching how they moved, now cautious, uncertain, waiting to see if the change was real or just temporary. The woman he'd given a chance to, the last remaining supervisor, approached him with measured steps. She was in her early 30s, hair pulled back tight, clipboard still in hand. "I'm Marisol," she said plainly. "Didn't expect that to happen today." "I didn't expect to be doing it," Jeremiah replied. "How long have you been here?" 3 years. Transferred from the Modesto site when this one opened." "Why'd you stay?" She took a breath. "I needed the hours. I've got 2 kids." Thought if I just kept my head down, I could outlast the chaos. Jeremiah nodded once. You've got about 24 hours to prove you can lead without fear. That's all I'm offering right now. She didn't ask for more. Understood. Jeremiah walked to the loading area where Tyrese was gingerly loading boxes onto a flatbed dolly. His limp had worsened. Come with me, Jeremiah said. Tyrese didn't argue. He followed him through the side door toward Jeremiah's rental parked near the fence. He opened the passenger side and pulled out a small cooler. Inside was a wrapped ice pack and a sandwich. Sit down, elevate your foot, Jeremiah said, pointing to a stack of wooden pallets nearby. Tyrese hesitated. Is this part of the test? No. It's part of being human. He handed him the ice pack. I'll have HR schedule you for an injury assessment, paid leave while you recover. No games. Tyrese looked down at the ice in his hands like he wasn't sure he was allowed to hold it. Jeremiah added, and when you come back, you'll be trained to assist with operations, not just run yourself into the ground. Tyrese blinked. What does that mean? You've got potential. I saw it day one. You see things other people miss. That's leadership material. Tyrese didn't speak right away. His eyes stayed on the ice pack as he pressed it to his ankle. Inside, Jeremiah returned to the floor and found Denise sorting through a fresh inbound manifest. She glanced up, hesitated, then walked over. I've got something you should know, she said, her voice low. Go ahead. There's a back-office file drawer upstairs. Craig kept hard copies of every complaint filed against him, physical ones, not digital. I think he was intercepting them before they reached regional. Jeremiah's face didn't change, but something in his posture tightened. Show me. She led him up the stairs to the office Craig had occupied. The room was still warm from the electronics humming inside. A half-eaten protein bar sat on the desk next to a tower of loose papers. Denise opened the bottom drawer of a locked cabinet. It had been left slightly ajar and pulled out a folder marked HR routing. Inside were dozens of pages, handwritten notes, complaint forms, some dated a year back. Some as recent as last week. Jeremiah flipped through them. One detailed forced overtime with no written authorization. Another described verbal harassment during safety briefings. Several mentioned retaliation for speaking up. He turned to Denise. Why didn't anyone raise this higher? We didn't know how far it went. We figured it got buried or worse, that corporate didn't care. Jeremiah took the folder. You were wrong. We care. I care. She nodded once but didn't smile. Relief maybe, but no joy, not yet. Downstairs, Lenny was adjusting a rack of shipping labels when Marisol approached with her clipboard. I need your help rebalancing the outbound lanes, she said. We've got a bottleneck on Dock 3. Lenny gave her a long look. You asking or telling? Asking, she said without hesitation. He nodded slowly. Then yeah, I'll help. Jeremiah watched from the mezzanine as the two of them walked toward the back dock. The change was subtle but real. People were moving with more coordination now, less glancing over shoulders, less tension in their steps. In the break room, Jeremiah found Leo sitting with a cup of coffee. His jacket was folded on the table beside him. I'm pulling you off the trucks, Jeremiah said. Leo didn't look startled, just sipped his coffee. You shouldn't be climbing anything, Jeremiah added. I've been saying that for a year, Leo replied. Starting tomorrow, I want you in a training role. Teach the new hires how to read manifests, how to inspect inventory, how to do the job right. Leo raised an eyebrow. You think they'll listen to me? They already do. I've seen it. Leo nodded once and leaned back in his chair. Guess it's about time someone did. Later that afternoon, Jeremiah gathered the crew near the center of the warehouse. There's going to be a lot of change in the next few weeks, he said. Some of it won't be easy. But it's necessary. No one interrupted. Starting today, we're bringing in an operations auditor to assess equipment and workflow. If something's broken, it gets fixed. No more workarounds. A few heads nodded. We'll be rotating shifts to make sure no one's pulling unsafe hours. If you're hurt or need time, you'll get it. No questions, no threats. Jeremiah paused, letting the words settle. And we're reopening the internal reporting system. Any concern, any mistreatment, it comes straight to me, not filtered, not delayed. He looked around the room. Lenny stood with his arms crossed but nodded. Denise kept her eyes on him. Tyrese, still seated near the wall with his foot elevated, gave a quiet thumbs up. Jeremiah finished. I built this company on the belief that people matter more than profit. Somewhere along the way, we lost that here. But we're going to fix it. When the group dispersed, Marisol approached him again. Regional called, said they got your message. They'll be here tomorrow to start the review. Good. I want every inch of this place documented. And I want a full report on Craig's time here, expenses, hours, shift logs. Everything. She clicked her pen. Already started. As the sun dipped low outside, casting long shadows across the warehouse floor, Jeremiah walked the aisles one last time. The air still carried the weight of exhaustion, but it wasn't the same kind of silence as before. It wasn't fear. It was pause, the kind that comes after something breaks and right before something better begins. By the end of the week, the air inside Warehouse 14 had shifted from tense to cautious. Not relaxed, no one expected that overnight, but the silence that had once felt oppressive now carried a different weight. Possibility. Jeremiah returned the morning after the regional audit team arrived. They were already interviewing staff and walking aisle by aisle with clipboards and handheld scanners. 2 of them were former warehouse leads he'd promoted years ago, people who knew what corners looked like when they were cut. Marisol met him near the inventory cage with a printed schedule in hand. Shift rotation starts today, she said. We staggered the gaps to keep things moving without drowning anyone. He scanned the names. What about coverage? I filled 4 of the open slots with floaters from nearby sites. They're trained and cleared. They'll rotate through here for 2 weeks until we finish onboarding replacements. She didn't wait for approval. She was already walking toward the inbound dock. Jeremiah followed. Denise was there, standing next to a temp in a bright blue vest. She was showing him how to read the colored bin code markers, something Craig had routinely ignored. The temp nodded and asked a few questions before moving to the scanning station. Jeremiah waited until the bin was loaded before speaking. You've got a feel for this place, he said. Denise glanced at him, wiping her hands on her pants. I've spent 2 years cleaning up mistakes I didn't make. It's second nature now. I want you to head quality control across all outbound lines. You'll have 2 dedicated team members and you'll report directly to Marisol. She raised her eyebrows but said nothing at first. Why me? Because you already do the job. I'm just giving you the title and the authority to do it right. Her face didn't break into a smile, but her shoulders dropped slightly, as if something she'd been carrying had finally eased. I'll need 2 days to set up the documentation logs, she said. You've got it. Jeremiah turned toward the mezzanine and climbed the stairs slowly. The office Craig had occupied had been cleared out. The walls were bare now except for a whiteboard with a new shift layout. Leo sat at a desk along the back wall, organizing laminated training guides. You settling in? Jeremiah asked. Leo didn't look up, still figuring out how to teach people who move twice as fast as I do. Don't need speed, just need clarity. Leo pulled out a binder with a line map of the warehouse. I added hazard zones to the walkthrough script. A few of them were never labeled. That's how that kid rolled his ankle last month. Jeremiah leaned on the edge of the desk. We've got a safety partner coming in Tuesday. Walk them through everything. Leo gave a quiet nod, then flipped to the next page. Downstairs, the audit team had paused by the conveyor lane where the rollers used to jam. One of the newer floaters, a woman with a shaved head and sleeves of tattoos on both arms, was running the line cleanly. Jeremiah walked down and met one of the auditors near the exit lane. Any red flags? He asked. The auditor tapped his tablet. Mechanical issues are being logged now. There's still a delay on parts for one of the pallet lifts, but it's flagged and documented. No signs of falsified records so far. The paper trail was thin but not manipulated. Jeremiah exhaled slowly. What about the crew? They're hesitant, but not hostile. That's better than expected. Jeremiah stepped outside to check the trailer rotation. The Fresno driver, the one Craig had tried to intimidate, was back. She stood beside her truck while a young man in gloves signed off the manifest. She caught sight of him and walked over. "Didn't think I'd see you again," she said. "Neither did I, honestly." She leaned against the trailer. "Word's gone around. Other drivers are hearing about what happened here. Some of us stopped bidding for this route after the last few visits. It got that bad." "Craig's gone," Jeremiah replied. "I know. That's why I took the run today." He nodded once and handed her a bottle of water from the cooler by the loading ramp. "You'll see changes," he said. "For real this time." She took the bottle and gave a single, short nod before heading back to her cab. Inside, Tyrese was seated in the break area, ankle wrapped and propped on a stool. A regional HR rep was walking him through recovery leave paperwork. Jeremiah waited until the session ended. "You've got 4 weeks," he said as he sat down across from him. "At full pay. If your doctor clears you sooner, we'll reassess. If not, we'll wait." Tyrese stared at the paper in front of him. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just heal." Tyrese swallowed hard and folded the document slowly. "I didn't think anyone up top even knew our names." Jeremiah leaned forward. "That's on me." Outside, the sun had risen high, baking the edge of the lot. 2 new recruits from Modesto were unloading a side trailer with Marisol supervising. She didn't raise her voice, just pointed to the lift gate and gave clear, short instructions. Jeremiah stepped back into the office and opened his laptop. The folder Denise had uncovered had been scanned and filed. He clicked through it once more, then began drafting a memo. Not a press release. Not a sanitized internal briefing. A direct letter to every warehouse employee in the company. He didn't talk about culture shifts or efficiency metrics. He talked about trust, how it had been broken, how it would take time to rebuild, and how actions, not words, would define whether they succeeded. He didn't sign it as CEO. He signed it as Jeremiah. Later that afternoon, he walked the warehouse floor one final time before his flight back to headquarters. Not to inspect, not to supervise, just to observe. He saw Lenny explaining a sorting pattern to one of the temps. Denise was at a terminal, checking inventory tags. Leo was showing a trainee how to identify compromised pallets. And Marisol, clipboard gone, replaced with gloves, was lifting crates with the team. No corner of the warehouse felt hidden anymore. As he stepped outside to his waiting car, the last thing he saw was Tyrese, still seated, watching the floor from the break room window. His face unreadable but not defeated, Jeremiah nodded to himself. This wasn't fixed yet, but it was finally facing the right direction.